Lil Durk's wife, India, breaks down crying in court after realizing it's over. That scene captures something that cannot be fully explained from the outside looking in. The federal murder-for-hire case surrounding one of Chicago drill's most important artists has reached a point of no return. Prosecutors are building what they call a layered evidentiary case. People from inside Durk's own circle are appearing as potential government witnesses, and a life sentence is sitting at the end of that road if a jury comes back with a guilty verdict. India Royale has been in that courtroom. She has seen the evidence. She has heard the arguments. And what she is facing right now is the very real possibility that everything she and Durk built together could be stripped away permanently. Stay with us, because the full story of what this case has become and what it means for everyone inside that courtroom goes much deeper than any single viral moment. But real quick, if you're serious about winning in the rap game, I put everything I know into one ebook. I'm talking how to actually grow an audience from zero, how to get labels reaching out to you with deals, and even how to get paid in this industry without ever touching a mic. And nah, it's not too late. People love to say the wave passed. It didn't. New artists and new hustlers are blowing up every single day, and the ones eating are the ones who started now instead of waiting. It's only $14.99. That's a few cups of coffee for a blueprint that can change how you move in this game forever. Links in the description bio. Go grab it. Then let's get back to the video. Yo, what's good, fam? We're breaking down the full story of Lil Durk's federal murder-for-hire case, India Royale's courtroom presence, the evidence prosecutors are bringing, and what all of this means for Durk's future. Let's get into it. Before we get into the case itself, let's understand the personal stakes. Durk Devontae Banks, born October 19, 1992 on Chicago's South Side, built himself into one of the most successful and influential rappers of his generation, without a major label cosign, without industry connections from the jump, and without abandoning the sound and the identity that made him credible in the first place. He founded Only the Family, built it into a genuine music enterprise, signed to Alamo Records, dropped projects that went platinum, performed at the Grammys, and became the dominant voice of Chicago drill in an era when that genre was defining the mainstream. By the time federal agents arrested him in Broward County, Florida on October 24, 2024, Lil Durk was one of the most streamed artists in the world. India Royale married him in 2024. They share a daughter together, and Durk has 7 children total across his family. India has not been a silent observer throughout this legal battle. She posted a photo of the two of them on her Instagram story and wrote simply that the whole world could go sour on you, and she was never switching up. She attended his court hearing in January 2026 when the trial was delayed again, sitting in the gallery while his defense attorneys and prosecutors argued over timelines and evidence. When Durk appeared in court with a new buzz cut, having cut his signature dreadlocks, he blew kisses at her from across the room. These are not dramatic reconstructions. They are documented moments from a real marriage trying to survive. One of the most serious federal prosecutions in hip-hop history. When India sits in that courtroom and the evidence gets presented, she is not processing it as contempt. She is processing it as her husband's life, her family's future, and the possibility that the man she married could be taken away from her permanently. That is the weight that the title of this documentary is really talking about. Not entertainment, consequence. Now let's talk about what the government says happened. Federal prosecutors allege that Lil Durk orchestrated and financed a murder-for-hire operation targeting rapper Quando Rondo, whose real name is Tyquan Terrell Bowman, in retaliation for the November 2020 shooting death of King Von in Atlanta. King Von, born Davon Daquan Bennett, was one of Durk's closest associates and signed to OTF. He was shot and killed outside an Atlanta hookah lounge during an altercation that involved members of Quando Rondo's crew. Prosecutors allege that Durk never forgave that and eventually financed a plan to make Quando Rondo pay for it. The alleged operation reached its violent conclusion on August 19, 2022, near a gas station not far from the Beverly Center Mall in Los Angeles. Prosecutors say 5 OTF associates purchased plane tickets from Chicago to Los Angeles, rented cars, tracked Quando Rondo's movements, and executed an ambush. Quando Rondo survived. His cousin and associate Xavier Robinson, known as Lou Pab, was fatally shot. He was not the intended target. He was simply there. His family has been fighting for accountability ever since. and his mother attended the June 2025 bond hearing specifically to tell Judge Michael Fitzgerald that she feared for her own life and begged the court not to release the man she held responsible. Durk has pleaded not guilty. His attorneys have maintained since the beginning that the allegations are false and that the prosecution lacks the kind of direct, concrete evidence required to convict someone beyond a reasonable doubt of orchestrating a murder for hire from hundreds of miles away. That legal battle is still being fought, and the trial date is now set for August 20th, 2026. After multiple delays, pushed it from its original October 2025 date through January 2026, April 2026, and finally into August. But here's where it gets real. The delays have not helped Durk in any way that changes the fundamental situation. Every delay has been accompanied by new information, new legal filings, new evidentiary rulings, and growing public attention. And the evidence that prosecutors are bringing to court has expanded into a web that is designed to make it very difficult for a jury to look at the individual pieces in isolation. Let's talk about what that evidence actually looks like. The government is not relying on one smoking gun. What prosecutors describe is an assembled case made of multiple categories of evidence that they intend to connect into a single narrative. The OTF credit card paper trail is one piece of it. Prosecutors allege that a card linked to only the family was used to purchase flights from Chicago to Los Angeles for the men they say carried out the alleged attack. In a federal conspiracy case, financial records and travel information are not just background details. They are the building blocks of the government's theory that the alleged operation was planned, coordinated, and paid for. If prosecutors can show that specific people traveled from Chicago to Los Angeles using funds connected to Durk's organization in the days surrounding the shooting, they are establishing a link between the alleged financing and the alleged action. The iCloud evidence is another layer. Prosecutors obtained material from Durk's personal iCloud account, including text messages, photographs, and other digital communications that the government says help establish motive and direct connections between Durk and the alleged operation. Defense attorneys have fought aggressively against the admission of certain materials, arguing that digital evidence can be misinterpreted, taken out of context, and that the prosecution's reading of these communications does not automatically reflect what was actually said or meant. But the battle over iCloud evidence going into trial reflects how important prosecutors believe it is to their case. Then there are the lyrics and the music videos. Judge Fitzgerald ruled ahead of trial that selected OTF-related media, including certain music videos, would be admitted as evidence. He also ruled that some lyrics would be barred, specifically a verse from Durk's appearance on Babyface Ray's Wonderful Wayne and Jackie Boy that prosecutors initially cited as evidence of retaliation planning until the defense demonstrated the song was recorded months before the August 2022 shooting. That win for the defense eliminated one piece of the prosecution's evidence, but other media remained on the table. Durk's family in India Royale issued a public statement in April 2025, pushing back against the use of his music in the case, saying that Durk had always used music to tell stories, to express pain and to heal, and that those same lyrics were now being used against him. They called it the criminalization of Black artistic expression. Defense attorneys have made a similar argument in court, describing the lyrics as hyperbolic poetry carrying an extraordinary risk of being misunderstood by jurors. Prosecutors counter that lyrics and videos go to Durk's state of mind, the hierarchy within OTF, and the motivations behind the alleged operation. Now let's talk about the cooperating witnesses, because this is the part of the case that changes the temperature of the entire situation. Federal conspiracy prosecutions often turn on what people from inside a defendant's circle are willing to say under oath. And in Durk's case, the people the government is presenting as potential witnesses are not strangers who observe something from a distance. They are, allegedly, people who have known Durk for years. OTF Jam, whose legal name is James Jones Jr., has been identified in prosecution materials as a key cooperating witness in the case. Reports indicate that after being released from a 12-year prison sentence, Jam allegedly wore a hidden wire for years around Durk, capturing direct audio evidence of private conversations inside the OTF circle. That detail alone changes the weight of everything else in the case. A hidden wire is not a cooperating witness recounting conversations from memory. It is potentially recorded evidence of what was actually said in real time in rooms where Durk believed he was speaking privately. Jam's long history around Durk and OTF is precisely what makes his potential testimony so significant for the government's case. What a longtime insider can offer a prosecution is not just facts, it is context, it is background. It is the private conversations and observations that no financial record or digital file can fully capture. Prosecutors reportedly intend to use the song Back Again and surrounding evidence to argue that a $50,000 payment referenced in the song had a meaning beyond a simple cash gift between associates. The defense will challenge that interpretation directly, and they will have the opportunity to do so in cross-examination. A jury will ultimately have to decide whether the government's reading of that payment is correct or whether the defense's explanation is more persuasive. But the fact that prosecutors are attempting to use a piece of music as evidence that a financial transaction was connected to the alleged murder-for-hire operation illustrates just how comprehensive their evidentiary approach has become. Jam's potential testimony reportedly includes an account of an encounter in a music video setting in which Durk allegedly told him to slow down on violent activity because it was attracting too much law enforcement attention. If that testimony is presented and believed by a jury, it suggests that Durk had awareness of violent conduct around him and was attempting to manage its visibility. Prosecutors would frame that as evidence of a man who understood what was happening and was trying to control the fallout. Defense attorneys would frame it very differently, arguing that such a statement, even if it occurred exactly as described, cannot be stretched into proof of a murder-for-hire conspiracy. Devin Cross, known as OTF Vonnie, has been widely identified in legal circles and reporting as a second major cooperating witness, referred to as PW2 in prosecution materials. Prosecutors are reportedly using footage of Vonnie, King Von, and Durk together to help establish the existence and structure of what the government characterizes as a tight-knit criminal enterprise. That footage is significant because it does not simply place these individuals in the same location. It is being used to argue that the relationships between them were not just personal, but organizational in a way that connects directly to the alleged murder-for-hire operation. What is clear is that the government's case involves multiple people from around Durk's world, and the prosecution is going to attempt to use their testimony to build the human narrative behind the financial and digital evidence. Now let's talk about 6ix9ine, because his presence in this story is stranger than almost anything else surrounding the case. Daniel Hernandez, known as 6ix9ine, cooperated with federal prosecutors in his own racketeering case in 2019, testified against members of the 9 Trey Bloods gang, and received a significantly reduced sentence as a result. His cooperation made him one of the most controversial figures in hip-hop, and the years-long rivalry between him and Lil Durk became one of the defining beef narratives of the early 2020s. 6ix9ine spent much of 2024 and 2025 using Durk's arrest as an opportunity to mock him relentlessly. He released videos specifically calling out Durk for crashing out over Instagram comments and destroying his life just to prove a point to, in his words, iPad kids online. He pointed out that he was free, alive, and hugging his mother, while Durk was in a federal cell facing life without parole. His messaging was consistent and deliberate. He was free, Durk was not, and he considered that the final word on everything they had argued about for years. But here is where it gets genuinely unexpected. Prosecutors have reportedly been allowed to introduce a 2021 interview in which 6ix9ine and media personality Wack 100 discussed and publicly mocked Durk over whether he would retaliate for King Von's death. The interview is not being used to make 6ix9ine a hero or a villain in this case. It is being used as potential evidence of the environment of public pressure surrounding Durk in the period before the alleged attack on Quando Rondo. Prosecutors may argue that the kind of public humiliation Durk faced in that interview, being called out by name and questioned about whether he had the loyalty to respond to his best friend's death, contributed to the environment in which the alleged retaliation was allegedly planned. That same trolling that seemed like ordinary rap beef in 2021 has now potentially become part of a federal murder-for-hire prosecution. Then there is the academic's interview. Prosecutors have indicated they believe Durk made statements in a conversation with DJ Academics that suggest he had more knowledge about the murder-for-hire than he publicly acknowledged. The government filed a motion accusing Durk of witness intimidation in connection with the case, and the U.S. Attorney Bilal Assaili made it explicit that Durk was not on trial for his lyrics or his music, but because he allegedly directed, orchestrated, and financed the murder plot. That framing is significant because it shows exactly how the prosecution wants the jury to see this case, not as a creative interpretation of rap music, but as a documented criminal conspiracy. Let's talk about what the trial's potential outcome actually means for Durk's family. The charges Durk faces include conspiracy and use of interstate facilities in connection with murder for hire resulting in death. Those charges carry potential sentences including life imprisonment without parole. The death penalty, which was briefly considered by federal prosecutors, was ultimately taken off the table. What remains is still one of the most severe sentencing possibilities in the federal criminal code. A life sentence would mean Durk could not leave federal prison growing up without their father present in the way a father needs to be present. It would mean OTF continuing without the person at its center. His catalog under the management of business partners and lawyers is unreleased music sitting in hard drives and servers while the legal estate works through the financial and contractual implications of permanent incarceration. None of that is what the verdict will be, but all of that is what a guilty verdict could mean. And that distinction between what might happen and what has happened is the specific space India Royale has been living in since October 24th, 2024. Durk has been held in solitary confinement at MDC Los Angeles for much of his pretrial detention, spending 23 hours a day in a small cell after allegedly being caught with an Apple Watch. His attorneys brought the confinement conditions to Judge Fitzgerald's attention in January 2026, arguing that the isolation was affecting his psychological well-being and his ability to assist in his own defense. The judge set a hearing on the issue. For a man who went from one of the most visible stages in music to a federal holding cell where he released his album Deep Thoughts from confinement, the distance between those two realities is difficult to fully comprehend. The legal battle heading into August 20th is far from over. The defense has secured meaningful wins along the way, including the severance of the racketeering charges from the main Los Angeles murder for hire counts, eliminating the Chicago killing allegation from the first trial. They successfully barred certain lyrics that prosecutors had incorrectly timed relative to the shooting. They have challenged the motives behind cooperation agreements and pushed back on the characterization of OTF as a criminal organization. Defense attorney Drew Findling, who has been with Durk through the entirety of this fight, told reporters after one of the hearings that the defense has been unwavering in its commitment to Banks and his innocence. What the jury will ultimately hear is a story the prosecution has spent nearly 2 years building. It begins with the death of King Von in November 2020. It moves through the alleged desire for revenge, the alleged planning and financing of the Los Angeles operation, the travel from Chicago, the ambush near the gas station, Lil Pav's death, and then the layers of digital, financial, lyrical, and witness evidence that prosecutors say connect all of it to Durk. The defense will have the opportunity to challenge every piece of that story and to argue that the government cannot meet the only standard that actually matters in a criminal trial: proof beyond a reasonable doubt. That standard is the thing that social media cannot replicate. An indictment is not a conviction. A leaked filing is not a verdict. A viral claim about what some witness allegedly said is not sworn testimony that has survived cross-examination. The courtroom, not the comment section, will decide what happens to Lil Durk. For India Royale, every court date is a reminder of what is at stake. She has been there. She has watched. She has posted her loyalty publicly when rumors tried to make her out to be moving on. She has sat in a courtroom gallery while attorneys argued over evidence that directly determines the rest of her husband's life. Whether the image in the documentary's title represents a single emotional moment or the accumulated weight of 22 months of pretrial detention, death threats against the judge and prosecutor, multiple trial delays, and the growing seriousness of the evidence being presented, what it captures is real. A wife watching the full consequences of a federal murder for hire case try to close in on everything she built with the person she chose. The case is not over. The verdict has not been returned. The jury has not been seated. And until that changes, the phrase "it's over" means nothing in a court of law. What it means in the hallways outside the courtroom, in the gallery where India sits, in the conversations between Durk and his attorneys through federal prison glass, that is a different story entirely. and it is still being written. Let's go back and examine what the cooperating witness situation actually means from a human perspective. In federal conspiracy cases, the government frequently offers sentencing considerations or cooperation agreements in exchange for testimony. That means people who were once inside the same circle, sharing meals, recording music, and building something collectively, can end up on opposite sides of a courtroom because the system has given them a personal legal incentive to do so. The defense has made clear they intend to challenge the motives behind every cooperation agreement. The phrase day ones carries enormous weight in hip-hop culture. A day one is someone who was there before the success, before the money, before the visibility. When the government presents testimony from people who occupied that role in a defendant's life, the story it tells is not just about the alleged crime. It is about what it means when the people closest to you become the people speaking against you in federal court. For Durk supporters, that represents a betrayal that goes beyond any legal definition. For the prosecution, it represents exactly the kind of first-hand testimony that makes a conspiracy case most powerful. And for the associates making that choice, the math is not complicated. The federal government carries a conviction rate that hovers around 98%. When that number is sitting in front of you alongside your own potential sentence, the decision to cooperate becomes less about loyalty and more about survival. The sheer number of trial delays tells its own story. January 2025, October 2025, January 2026, April 2026, 2026. Each delay came with its own circumstances. The volume of digital evidence, the complexity of the multi-defendant situation, and the time needed to review thousands of pages of discovery. Judge Fitzgerald denied the co-defendant severance request, ruling that defendants accused of participating in the same alleged conspiracy are typically tried together, meaning the entire group moves on one timeline. During one of the 2026 hearings, Judge Fitzgerald pressed prosecutors on why they had waited so long to bring allegations connected to a January 2022 Chicago incident. The judge's visible skepticism showed that the court is not simply accepting everything the government presents, and that the evidentiary battles have been genuinely contested rather than one-sided. The final pre-trial conference on August 19, 2026, the day before the scheduled trial start, resolved several remaining evidentiary disputes while leaving others under submission. Judge Fitzgerald admitted several exhibits, including communications about arranging travel, messages concerning the alleged conspiracy, and certain jail calls involving co-conspirators. He declined to admit other exhibits against specific defendants where prosecutors had not established the required foundation. Defense attorneys have been fighting line by line over what the jury will actually see and hear. And those battles matter enormously because what stays out of a federal courtroom can be just as important as what goes in. OTF is not simply a street crew. It is a functioning music business with artists, contracts, and catalogs. If Durk is convicted and sentenced to life, the organization he built continues without its founder indefinitely, a transition no one inside planned for. Durk released Deep Thoughts from prison in March 2025. 5 months into his detention. The album included emotionally charged tracks reflecting his struggles, his love for his family, and his longing for freedom. The music he made from that cell is not evidence of guilt or innocence. It is evidence of someone who refused to stop being who he is, even inside the most constraining and frightening circumstances of his life. That is the contradiction at the center of this entire story. An artist who built an identity around survival, loyalty, and not backing down is now waiting for a jury to decide whether the choices he allegedly made in the aftermath of his best friend's death will cost him everything he built. India Royale sits in the courtroom gallery and watches that contradiction play itself out in real time, hearing the same evidence that millions of people discuss online, but experiencing it as something entirely personal, entirely permanent, and entirely terrifying in a way that no documentary title can fully capture. Do you think Lil Durk will beat this case, or is it really over? Drop your thoughts in the comments below and tap the video on screen for more.